When the doctor told me Grandpa might not make it through the night, I dropped everything and flew across the country. I texted my dad from the airport, hoping for support. His reply, a photo from a yacht in Miami, cocktail in hand, sunglasses on, smiling. That was the moment I knew I was on my own. My name is Madeline Carter. I design homes to hold memories. But nothing in my life prepared me for the day I found out the man who raised me was abandoned by the people who should have loved him most. And when I brought him home, the locks had been changed. I was in the middle of presenting a design brief to a new client when the call came in. The hospital, Charleston General. My grandfather, Harold Carter, had collapsed at home. Massive stroke. He was unconscious, unresponsive, and they weren't sure he'd make it through the night. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, holding a fabric swatch in one hand and a stylus in the other, while the rest of the room faded into a distant hum. I didn't even say goodbye. I just packed up my laptop, called the airline, and booked the next flight out of Denver. My phone buzzed with missed calls, rescheduled meetings, a disappointed message from my assistant about deadlines. None of it mattered. Grandpa mattered. He was the one who taught me how to hold a hammer before I learned cursive. The one who picked me up from middle school when my parents forgot. The one who showed up to every event with a proud smile and a louder cheer than necessary. And now he was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for breath, while I was thousands of miles away. By the time I landed in Charleston, it was past midnight. The air smelled like salt and old pine, and the quiet hum of the city felt foreign. I rented a car, drove with white knuckles through dark streets, and reached the hospital just after 1 a.m. The receptionist gave me a tight smile, her eyes heavy with the kind of tired only night shifts could bring. ICU's on the 4th floor. Room 4B. He's stable for now, she said gently. The elevator felt like it took years. I stepped out and walked down the long hallway, each footstep echoing louder than the last. Then I saw him. Grandpa. He looked smaller than I remembered. Frail. Tubes ran from his arms, machines beeped rhythmically at his side. His chest rose and fell in shallow intervals. His skin, usually so tanned from years of gardening, looked ghostly against the sterile white of the sheets. I stood there, frozen. Part of me wanted to believe it wasn't him. That the man who once built our backyard shed in 2 days couldn't possibly be this still. But it was. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, until I was beside his bed. I reached out and touched his hand. It was cold. Still. I wrapped my fingers around his and whispered, "I'm here, Grandpa. I made it." My eyes burned. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear landed on the hospital blanket. I wiped it away and pulled out my phone. I needed support. I needed my family. I dialed my father. He picked up after the second ring. I heard wind, laughter, and a faint crashing of waves. Madeline, what's up?" he said cheerfully. I swallowed hard. "Dad, Grandpa's in the ICU. He's not doing well. They said he might not make it through the night." There was a pause, then the sound of clinking glasses. "Yeah, the hospital called me too," he replied casually. "We're down in Miami, got a little beach house for the week. Everything's booked, non-refundable. You know how it is." I stared at the linoleum floor, bile rising in my throat. "So, you're not coming back?" Another pause. "Look, just keep us updated, okay? You're there, that's what matters." My grip tightened around the phone. "This isn't a client meeting, Dad. It's Grandpa." "I know," he said with a sigh. "But someone has to be with him, and you are. You're doing great, sweetheart." The call ended with a soft beep. I stood there for a long time, holding the phone to my ear even after the screen went black. Then I turned back to Grandpa. "They're not coming," I whispered. "But I'm here. I'm staying, no matter what." That first night I didn't move from the chair beside Grandpa's bed. It was one of those stiff, plastic recliners hospitals pretend are comfortable. My back ached, my legs cramped. But I stayed. I couldn't leave him alone. Not after what I just heard. The steady beep of the heart monitor echoed in the room like a ticking clock, reminding me how little time we might have left. I wrapped the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders and looked at him. His face had changed. Less of the stoic grandfather who taught me how to fix a sink, more of a man who had been forgotten. And yet I could still see him there. The man who made me scrambled eggs every morning before school, who once sewed a button on my coat because my parents were too busy to notice it was missing. He never missed a birthday. He was the only one who clapped the loudest when I got my first design award. Those memories rushed back like floodwaters. I was 6, sitting cross-legged in his garage, watching him build a birdhouse. I had paint all over my face. He had said, "If you want a home to feel alive, put love in every nail." That's how I became who I am. That's why I build homes, not houses. Because of him. I glanced at my phone again, wondering if maybe, just maybe, my dad had changed his mind. But there were no new texts, just one unread message from Sophie, my younger sister. I opened it, hope stirring in my chest. The screen lit up with a photo. Sophie, Mom and Dad all smiled into the camera, standing on a white, sandy beach. Tropical shirts, drinks in hand, sun-kissed and glowing. The caption read, "Family time, finally unplugged." My fingers went numb. They were all there, my whole family, the ones I thought would drop everything to be here with us. They hadn't just left me to deal with Grandpa, they were celebrating. I zoomed in just to be sure. Mum in her oversized sun hat, Sophie with her trademark aviators, and Dad holding a piña colada. I read the caption again. Family time. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stared at Grandpa, my throat burning with betrayal. "They left us," I whispered. "They just left." He didn't move, of course, but I still reached out and held his hand. Anger bubbled in my chest. Not just at Dad, but at all of them. Mom, who had always claimed to be the glue of the family. Sophie, who cried when Grandpa gave her away at prom because Dad was too busy golfing. How quickly they forgot. How easily they replaced devotion with distraction. Margaritas instead of memories. I typed out a reply but deleted it. What could I say? You're sipping cocktails while Grandpa might be dying? That I'm alone in a cold hospital room while you're posting selfies? No message could capture the knot in my chest. Instead, I stood up and whispered into Grandpa's ear, "It's just us now, like it's always been." I spent the rest of the night reading from his old poetry book I had found in his attic the last time I visited. He always loved Frost. His copy was worn, the pages dotted with penciled thoughts in the margins. I read aloud, even though I wasn't sure he could hear. I hoped he could. By sunrise, I hadn't slept, but I felt resolute. I texted my assistant to cancel all my client meetings for the next 2 weeks. Then I called the hotel near the hospital to book a long-term room. If they didn't want to come back, fine, I would stay, even if it meant holding his hand every hour of every day until the machines stopped beeping, even if it meant missing contracts, missing work, missing life, because he never missed a moment of mine. The days bled into nights, and the nights into something slower, heavier. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I set alarms on my phone to match the nurses' rounds, just in case they needed me to answer a question or translate a look from Grandpa's barely responsive face. The hospital room became my entire world. 4 beige walls, a cracked window blind, and the steady hum of machines that kept him alive. Every evening, around 8 p.m, after the nurses dimmed the lights, I pulled out the same worn poetry book and began to read. My voice was hoarse, sometimes cracking. But I read anyway. Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson, a little Langston Hughes when I needed rhythm to keep from crying. I read not just to fill the silence, but to remind myself that love didn't vanish just because words did. Grandpa used to say that stories kept the heart warm, so I kept telling ours. One night I finished a poem, "Do not go gentle into that good night," and just sat there, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. I reached for my phone. Maybe Sophie had finally replied. There it was. A message. My heart jumped. But it wasn't concern, it wasn't a question, it was a photo. Sophie standing on the deck of a boat, holding a tropical drink, wearing a sundress that fluttered in the sea breeze. Behind her, Mum and Dad lounged in deck chairs, sunglasses on, smiling like they hadn't a care in the world. The caption read, "Sunset vibes with the best people, hat blessed." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't know what stung more, the timing or the words, the best people. As if Grandpa and I didn't exist, as if we were nothing more than old furniture left behind in a house they'd already moved out of. I put the phone down slowly, trying to hold back the nausea. The beeping machines seemed louder, the air thicker, my vision blurred. This wasn't just distance, this was abandonment. I stood up and walked to the small bathroom attached to the room. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face. Then I looked at myself in the mirror, pale, shadows under my eyes, lips chapped, hair tied in a messy bun that hadn't been touched in days. But my eyes, they held something solid, resolve. I went back to the chair, sat down and picked up Grandpa's hand. It was warmer tonight, or maybe I just wanted it to be. "You didn't deserve this," I whispered. "None of this, not from them." I leaned back, resting my head against the wall, and let the silence settle between us. The kind of silence that says everything words can't. Eventually, I picked up my phone again and typed a response to Sophie's photo. "Grandpa's oxygen dipped today. The doctor said we should prepare. If you can make it back soon, you should." I stared at the message, then deleted it. What was the point? If a hospital bed and a ventilator couldn't pull them back, nothing would. That night, I cried without sound. Let the tears fall freely, quietly, like rain on a window, nobody's watching. I didn't sob, I didn't break down, I just let go. Not of Grandpa, but of the illusion that we were a family. The next morning, I woke to the sound of nurses wheeling in a portable monitor. Grandpa's vitals were being checked again, same as always, heart rate steady, oxygen dipping, then rising. "Holding stable," one of them said gently, writing it down. I nodded, more out of habit than understanding. Every beep, every line on the screen had started to blur into noise I couldn't shut out. After they left, I stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot, unsure of what I was waiting for. Then I picked up my phone and called Dad again. It rang longer this time. When he finally answered, his voice was casual, as if we'd just spoken over lunch. "Hey, Madeline, what's going on?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dad, the doctor said we don't know how long Grandpa has. Can you please come back?" A pause. I imagined him shifting his drink, maybe turning away from the beach view. "Madeline, we've talked about this. You're doing great. He's got you." "He needs his son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He might not wake up. He might never open his eyes again." "Then let him rest. You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be." "Dramatic?" My voice cracked. "He raised us. He deserves to not die alone." Another pause, then coldly, "You're there. That's what matters. Don't guilt trip us for making the best of the situation." I couldn't breathe. Before I could respond, he added, "Look, we'll check in later. Just hang in there, okay?" Click. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Then, for some reason I can't explain, I opened my text messages and scrolled to Mom. I hadn't messaged her directly since I landed. Maybe she'd listen. I typed, "Can you please convince Dad to come back? Or at least check in, I'm scared, Mom." I waited. A few minutes later the screen lit up. "Mum, don't make this bigger than it is. Your father is doing what he thinks is best. We all are. We all are. 3 words that knocked the air out of me. They talked about this, agreed on it, made a plan. While Grandpa was being hooked up to machines, my family was figuring out how to not be here. I didn't reply. I just sat in that too bright room with its buzzing light and chemical smell, and I stared at the man who had held our whole family together for decades, now being left to fade alone. It was then I opened the empty notebook I kept in my bag, the one I usually filled with sketches and home concepts. I tore out the first few pages. At the top I wrote, ICU Journal, Harold Carter, Day 4. Then I began. 7:08 a.m. Heart rate steady, BP lower than yesterday, eyes still closed, hands colder today. 7:30 a.m. Read Robert Frost again. Whispered, the road not taken, twice. 9:15 a.m. Nurse Abby says no change. I asked about trying music therapy tomorrow. I wrote down everything, every small shift, every moment he breathed in and out. It wasn't medical, it wasn't scientific, but it was mine. Ours. A record that he lived, that he mattered. And maybe when he woke up, if he woke up, he'd know I was there. Every minute, every heartbeat. The 12th morning began like all the others, with me curled in the hospital chair, my spine aching, my mouth dry from breathing recirculated air. The ICU was quieter than usual. The hum of machines, the shuffle of nurses' feet, the soft hiss of oxygen. But I had learned to read the silence here. It carried weight, mood. This morning it felt stiller. I blinked the sleep from my eyes and rubbed the back of my neck. The same nurse, Abby, stepped in for the vitals. Her face was kind but tired. No big changes, she said softly, but no setbacks either. I nodded, half listening, my gaze fixed on Grandpa. He looked the same, pale, sunken, distant. His hand lay limp beneath mine, our skin a contrast of warmth and age. The journal I'd started was now 5 days deep. I'd recorded his breathing patterns, changes in colour, which poems I read, what I whispered when I thought he might hear. I read them all again before sunrise. But this morning I felt something different. Not in him, but in me. A quiet pull in my chest, like a string being tugged from some place between memory and hope. I pulled out his poetry book once more, the one with penciled notes in the margins, the one that smelled like cedar and ink and years of loving hands. I flipped to the page I had bookmarked. His favourite poem, the one I'd read aloud a dozen times already, stopping by woods on a snowy evening. I took a breath and began to read. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. My voice was raspy but steady. But I have promises to keep. My hand rested lightly over his, and miles to go before I sleep. That's when it happened. The faintest twitch, a soft pressure. I froze. Was it just my imagination? A nerve, a spasm? But then, again, this time deliberate, gentle. His fingers closed around mine. I looked down, my eyes wide, heart pounding. His hand wasn't limp. It was squeezing, holding, real. "Grandpa?" I whispered, breathless. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, once, twice, and then slowly, like morning light creeping across a dark floor, his eyes opened, cloudy, confused, but alive. My throat closed. I couldn't speak. Tears sprang to my eyes before I even knew I was crying. I leaned closer, barely able to breathe. "It's me," I said, choking on the words. "It's Madeline. I'm here." His eyes found mine, uncertain at first, then recognition, a soft flicker of awareness, a connection sparking back to life. He didn't speak. He couldn't, but he didn't need to. He saw me. I pressed my forehead against his hand, shaking with relief. "You came back," I sobbed. "You really came back." The door burst open behind me as I hit the nurse call button with my elbow. Abby rushed in, followed by a second nurse, then a doctor. The room filled quickly with clipped commands and quick movements. They checked monitors, pupils, reflexes. I stepped back, my hands shaking, watching from the corner, afraid to blink and lose it all. "He responded to a verbal cue?" the doctor asked me. I nodded. "He squeezed my hand," I whispered. "He looked at me. He knew me." "That's a very good sign," the doctor said, more to his team than to me. I didn't care who he said it to. I just cared that it was true. For days I had lived between beeps, breaths, and blank stares. For days I had poured out poems into silence, wondering if they mattered. And now, in the space between a blink and a breath, hope returned. Grandpa was still here. The moment Grandpa's eyes opened, the hospital's energy shifted. Nurses came in more frequently. The doctor started using terms like responsive and rehabilitation potential. After 12 days of silence, a single look from him reset everything. That afternoon, when the room had settled, I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled, not with fear this time, but with something that felt like fragile hope. I typed a message to the family group chat, the one that had been mostly filled with vacation photos and silence since I arrived. "He woke up this morning. He looked at me. He held my hand." I stared at the message for a moment, then hit send. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. It was Sophie. "That's great. Let us know when he's stable though. Don't want to overwhelm him right now." Then Mum replied, "Yes, probably better to wait until he's more alert. We don't want to cause confusion or stress." I blinked at the screen. Not even a call. Not even a "how are you?" They weren't coming. Not even now. I leaned against the hallway wall, fighting the rising tide inside me. The man they had left behind was blinking awake from the edge of death, and all they could talk about was timing. "Twist the knife, why don't you?" Back inside, the doctor returned after reviewing the latest scans. "He's stable enough for some next steps," he said, "but it's going to be a long road. His motor functions are limited. Speech might take time. He'll need full-time physical therapy, cognitive work, mobility assistance, possibly a wheelchair for the foreseeable future." I nodded, absorbing each word like it was being carved into stone. "How long before he can go home?" "We'll need at least another 10 days for observation, but after that he can be discharged if he has proper care arrangements." Care arrangements? I didn't even hesitate. "I'll take care of him." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "You understand what that means? Full-time commitment, specialized equipment. You'll need to make modifications at home or consider a transitional facility." I said I'll take care of him, and I meant it. Later that evening, I sat by Grandpa's bed and held his hand while flipping through a folder the nurse had given me. Therapy recommendations, estimated costs, home care options. The numbers hit me like cold water: wheelchair ramps, hospital bed rentals, medication schedules. I didn't have long-term care insurance for him. I didn't even have access to his financials, but I had a credit card, some savings, and a stubborn streak that had gotten me through worse. I started making calls that night: rental vans, home care specialists, even a contractor about building a temporary ramp outside his porch. Every decision was made with clarity I hadn't felt in days, because for the first time, he wasn't slipping away. He was coming back, and I'd be damned if I let him come back to an empty room. 10 days later, I wheeled Grandpa out of Charleston General under a sky full of late spring sunshine. The warm breeze stirred what little hair remained on his head, and he tilted his face toward the light like he was drinking it in. That moment, seeing his eyes blink open to blue sky instead of hospital fluorescence, made everything feel worth it. I had rented a medical transport van and packed up his belongings in a small duffel. Our plan was simple: bring him back home. To his house on the corner of Maple and Eastbrook, the one with the creaky porch and the wind chimes he hung himself decades ago. the one with the oak tree we planted together when I turned 10. I turned into the neighbourhood, my heart aching with cautious hope. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but the thought of wheeling him back into familiar smells, familiar creaks, and sunlight pouring through his living room windows, that thought carried me. When we pulled up, something felt off. The front gate was open. Grandpa always locked it. There was a silver sedan in the driveway. Strange, we hadn't had visitors in months. Then I noticed the blinds. They were shut tight. Grandpa always left them open. My stomach twisted. Maybe the neighbours had been watching the place. Maybe someone was fixing something. Maybe... I parked the van and helped Grandpa into the wheelchair with slow, careful movements. As I pushed him up the walkway, the buzzing in my head grew louder. When we reached the front door, I pulled out the old house key. The brass was worn smooth from decades of use. I fitted into the lock. And it didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. My heart pounded. I tried the back door, also locked. Something's wrong, I muttered, mostly to myself. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Footsteps. Then the door opened, and standing there was a woman I didn't recognise, late 20s, ponytail, yoga pants, holding a coffee mug. She looked startled. "Hi, can I help you?" she asked, polite but cautious. I stared at her, stunned. "This is my grandfather's house," I said slowly. We're coming home." Her eyebrows pinched together. "Wait, Holston?" "Carter," I corrected, confused. "Harold Carter. He's lived here for over 40 years. She turned her head and called behind her, "Dylan, can you come here?" A man appeared, mid-30s, tousled hair, barefoot. He looked at us, then at Grandpa, then back at me. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "We bought this place last month, from a Martin Carter. Everything's legal. We have the deed." I felt the blood drain from my face. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible." "He wouldn't. Who sold it?" He disappeared briefly, then returned with a folder. "Martin Carter," he said, flipping the document around. "Said he had power of attorney, closed it through a real estate attorney. It's all verified." Behind me, I heard Grandpa's breath hitch. I turned. He looked confused, lost. Then I saw it, the tremble in his hands. He whispered, "My house?" I dropped to my knees beside him. "I didn't know," I choked. "Grandpa, I swear, I didn't know." The couple stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what to say, but I barely heard them. All I could hear was the silence of a home that wasn't ours anymore. The man, Dylan, stood frozen for a beat, as if unsure whether to speak again. Then, gently, he knelt and offered me the folder. "You can look," he said softly. "We're not trying to make trouble, but everything's there. The closing was smooth. Cash buyer, 1 week close. Your father signed everything." My hands moved on their own, trembling as I opened the folder. Inside, a stamped deed, contract pages, a signed affidavit, and there, in black ink, under seller's signature, was the name, Leon Carter. My stomach turned. I felt as if the air had been knocked from my lungs. My own father had sold my grandfather's house while Grandpa was lying unconscious in the ICU. I could barely process it. Not just the betrayal, not just the legality, but the precision of it, the speed, as if he'd planned this, as if he'd been waiting for the perfect moment, when Grandpa couldn't speak, couldn't object, couldn't defend his own life. Behind me, I heard the wheelchair creak. I turned. Grandpa was gripping the arms of the chair with both hands, his face pale, lips quivering, his eyes locked on mine, then shifted to the house behind me, the house he had painted himself, brick by brick, the porch where he sat every evening with a cup of tea, the tree he planted for my 10th birthday. "My house?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. Tears burned behind my eyes. "I didn't know," I whispered again, crouching beside him. Grandpa, I swear, I would never have let this happen. We thought you'd come home to everything the same. He didn't look at me. He kept staring past my shoulder, as if the house might morph back into what it was if he just stared hard enough. Then his lips moved again. The words came out cracked, like glass under pressure. It was supposed to be yours. My breath caught. I grabbed his hand, unable to speak. He turned his face slightly toward me. His eyes, usually so warm, were glassy now, not from age, but from heartbreak. You loved it, like I did, he whispered. I was going to leave it for you. My chest tightened. The couple at the door stepped back quietly, as if realizing they were witnessing something sacred and shattering all at once. We're sorry, the woman said gently. We didn't know. If we had, we never... It's not your fault, I said hoarsely. I helped Grandpa back into the van, his hands limp in my grasp. His head turned back one last time, eyes locked on the house. No tears, just silence. I shut the door and walked around to the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. As we pulled away, I didn't look back, but I knew, somewhere inside, something fundamental had cracked open between us and the people who were supposed to protect us. The hotel room was small and quiet, just 2 blocks from the hospital, but it felt like a cave. I asked for a ground floor suite with extra space for a wheelchair. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile without asking questions. I wheeled Grandpa into the room and helped him settle into the bed. He said nothing. His face was blank, but I saw it, the hollowness in his eyes. The wound went deeper than words. After he fell asleep, I sat at the small desk by the window, opened my laptop and began digging. I needed answers, not guesses, not assumptions, cold, legal, factual answers. I contacted Harrison and Bly, the law firm Grandpa had used for decades. Helen Bly, one of the founding partners, answered my call. Her voice carried both warmth and caution, the way someone sounds when they already know bad news is coming. Madeline, she said softly, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. You knew? I asked. I knew the house had sold. Yes, but not the circumstances. Can I come in today? Of course, she said. There's something I think you need to see. That afternoon, I left Grandpa resting and wheeled into the historic brick building downtown. The scent of old paper and lemon wood polish wrapped around me like a memory. Helen met me at the door with a manila folder in hand. This, she said, is the power of attorney your grandfather signed 2 years ago. I sat across from her, heart racing. She slid the document toward me, and I opened it with fingers that barely felt real. It was all there. My grandfather's shaky signature, a notarized stamp, and the box checked for full financial and property authority. Why would he sign this? I whispered. He trusted your father, Helen replied gently. I advised against full asset control, but Harold was adamant. It's Martin, he said. He wouldn't do anything wrong. I closed my eyes, bile rising. My father hadn't just betrayed my grandfather while he was vulnerable. He'd positioned himself 2 years in advance to do it legally. He sold the house without telling anyone, I said quietly. And the firm wasn't involved, Helen added. He used a separate real estate group, fast paperwork, all quiet. Do you know how much it sold for? Helen nodded and handed me a printout. 295,000. I blinked. That's at least 150 under market. Cash buyer, Helen said grimly. No inspections, quick close. It wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. My father hadn't panicked, he hadn't made a mistake, he had made a plan, and it worked. I left the law office that afternoon with the folder clutched tightly in my hands, feeling like I had just unearthed a family grave. The hotel room was dim when I returned. Grandpa was asleep, his chest rising and falling slowly under the thin blanket. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop again, needing more. The deed had answered some questions, but not the one gnawing hardest at me. How did Dad get him to sign it? I dug through my emails and found an old thread from 2 years ago. A vague message from Dad. Just got some paperwork squared away with Grandpa. POA stuff, in case of emergencies. All good now. The timestamp was just 3 weeks after Grandpa had been hospitalised for pneumonia. I stared at the date. He'd barely been lucid back then. He had recovered, yes, but slowly. Foggy. His memory was patchy. He forgot names, got lost in his own neighbourhood once, and Dad had brought him paperwork during that. I called Helen back. "Do you know who notarised the POA?" She checked and gave me a name. Delaney Morris, independent notary, retired real estate agent. Within 20 minutes, I found his number online and dialed. "Mr. Morris," I said, trying to sound neutral, "you witnessed a power of attorney signing for Harold Carter 2 years ago." There was a pause. "Yes," he said slowly. "Martin Carter brought him in." "Do you recall anything unusual?" Another pause, longer this time. "I remember Harold looked tired, confused. I asked if he understood what he was signing. Martin stepped in and said, 'Dad trusts me. We're just being smart for the future. I shouldn't have let that go. I regret it.' There it was. Pressure, manipulation, exploitation under the guise of love. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at my screen in silence. Then I opened a new document and started drafting. The letter was 2 pages long, formal, pointed, and unrelenting. I laid out the timeline, the discrepancy in sale price, the unauthorised use of the POA, and the direct deposit into a personal account. Because that was the final piece. I had requested a financial trace of the transaction from Helen's office. And every dollar, every cent from the sale of Grandpa's house had gone straight into a private checking account under the name Leon Carter. No trust, no joint account, no medical care fund, just him. I ended the letter with a demand, full restitution of the sale amount, plus value discrepancy. He had 10 days to respond, or I would file civil action. I sent the letter that night. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. Dad. I stepped outside into the hotel parking lot before answering. "Are you out of your mind?" he barked before I even said hello. "A lawsuit against your own father over a house?" I stayed silent for a beat. "No," I said calmly. "Over a betrayal." He scoffed. "Everything I did was legal." "Not everything legal is right. You think I pocketed that money? You think I'm some kind of thief?" "I don't think," I replied. "I have the bank records." There was silence. Then, "Go ahead, sue me, but don't ever call me your father again." He hung up. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, the words echoing louder than the traffic nearby. Springfield County Courthouse sat like a relic from another time. Red brick, ivy crawling along its corners, windows that never quite shut all the way. I arrived early on the morning of the hearing, wearing a navy blue suit I hadn't touched in years. No makeup, hair tied back. This wasn't a performance, it was a reckoning. Helen Bly met me on the steps, a leather case in hand, face calm. We'd spent days preparing, drafting arguments, organising files, prepping witness statements. Everything was in order. The law was clear. A power of attorney granted under suspicious circumstances, used for personal gain, was grounds for legal recourse. We walked in together. Inside the courtroom, my father was already seated at the defence table. He wore a sharp blazer and a familiar look, composed, detached, like none of this touched him. Mum sat behind him, Sophie, too, both stone-faced. They didn't look at me. The judge, Honourable Marcia Renner, took the bench with a gavel crack that seemed to split the silence like glass. "Let's begin," she said, voice crisp. Helen started strong. She laid out the timeline. Grandpa's hospitalization, the rushed POA signing, the suspicious sale, and the personal transfer of funds. She spoke clearly, calmly, as if reciting facts from a textbook, but every sentence landed like a hammer. Then came the part that made my throat tighten. She said, "This isn't just financial misconduct, it's familial abandonment masked as convenience. While Mr. Harold Carter lay unconscious, the man he trusted with his life sold the roof over his head and used the proceeds for personal leisure." Dad's attorney, Brennan Chase, rose with a practiced smile. "Your Honour," he began, "my client acted entirely within the scope of legal authority. The power of attorney was valid. The sale was lawful. The funds were not misappropriated. They were managed in the best interest of long-term care planning." I wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, I stayed still. Then Helen called our first witness, Delaney Morris. He walked slowly to the stand, a frail man in his late 60s with silver hair and a calm voice. He was sworn in and sat, hands folded tightly. "Mr. Morris," Helen asked, "can you describe the day you notarized the power of attorney for Harold Carter?" He nodded. "It was 2 years ago. Martin, Leon, brought him in, said they were preparing in case of medical issues." "Did Mr. Carter seem aware of what he was signing?" Morris hesitated. "He looked foggy, tired. I asked if he was comfortable." Before he could answer, Leon cut in, said, "Dad trusts me. It's all routine. I regret not pressing further." "Would you say Harold Carter was fully capable of informed consent?" He looked down. "Honestly, no, I wouldn't." The courtroom went still. I glanced toward my father. He didn't flinch. Mum leaned in and whispered something to Sophie. Sophie just shook her head and crossed her arms. When the judge called a recess, I stepped outside into the hallway. My legs felt like stone. The quiet buzz of vending machines and murmured conversations surrounded me. Then I heard a voice behind me. "You didn't have to do this, you know." I turned. Sophie. She looked angry, tired. "You didn't have to drag us all into court. This is humiliating," she said. "You think I care about humiliation?" I replied. "He sold Grandpa's house. He lied to us. To him." She crossed her arms. "You're making a scene. Over property." "No," I said firmly. "Over what's right." The courtroom reassembled after recess, the air thick with tension. The judge re-entered, adjusted her glasses, and nodded to Helen to continue. Helen rose calmly. "Your Honour, with the court's permission, we'd like to submit financial records obtained through a subpoena served to Atlantic National Bank." She handed the folder to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. The judge flipped through the documents, eyes narrowing slightly. "Please summarise," she said. Helen turned to the court. "These statements detail the movement of $295,000, the full amount from the sale of Mr. Harold Carter's residence. Not a cent was placed into a medical trust or joint account for Mr. Carter's care. Instead, the funds were deposited into an account labelled under the name Leon Carter, Lifestyle Reserve." There were audible whispers from the audience benches. Helen continued, "Further withdrawals from that account include payments for beachfront lodging in Miami, a yacht rental, and various leisure expenditures between June 3rd and June 11th, the same period Mr. Harold Carter remained unconscious in the ICU." I looked across the room. Dad's jaw tightened. His lawyer scribbled something and passed him a note, but his eyes stayed locked forward, unmoved. Helen returned to her table, and the judge turned to the defence. "Mr. Chase." Brennan stood, but the wind had clearly been knocked out of his argument. "Your Honour, while the optics are unfortunate, the legality of the POA and Mr. Carter's discretion in using it cannot be denied." "The court," Judge Renner interrupted, "is not debating optics. We are questioning whether the fiduciary duty granted by POA was ethically upheld. I believe we have enough evidence to determine that." She straightened the papers before her. "Leon Carter exploited a position of trust for personal benefit while his father was medically incapacitated. Though the sale was technically legal under a valid power of attorney, the usage of funds and lack of consideration for the principal's best interest constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty." She looked directly at my father. This court orders full restitution of the $295,000 sale, an additional $150,000 in estimated loss due to undervaluation, and immediate revocation of the existing power of attorney. Furthermore, the defendant must file a written statement of accountability with the county probate office within 30 days. The gavel hit the wood like thunder. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My body shook, not with triumph, but with something colder, emptier. I had won, but at what cost? Outside, the sky was a bleak grey, spring clouds swirling low. I found Grandpa waiting near the building's entrance, his nurse standing behind him. He looked up as I approached, eyes tired, but clear. "It's done," I said softly. He nodded, said nothing. Then behind me, footsteps. I turned. Mom and Sophie stood just a few feet away. Sophie wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom held her purse tightly in front of her, like a shield. "This didn't need to be public," Mom said quietly. "We could have handled this as a family." I swallowed hard. "That's the thing. You didn't act like one." Sophie finally looked at me, her eyes cold. "You embarrassed all of us." "No," I said, voice firmer. "I stood up for the one person who never turned his back on me." There was a long silence. Then they turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw them for months. With the settlement finalized and the check issued, I spent 2 days touring the edges of Springfield, searching not for a house, but for something gentler. A place with soft light and quiet mornings. A place that felt like a second chance. I found it on a sleepy lane 3 miles from the ocean. A pale yellow cottage with a wraparound porch, a rose bush growing wild along the fence, and wind chimes already hanging under the eaves. The previous owner was an elderly widow moving in with her daughter. She smiled when I said it was for my grandfather. "He'll be happy here," she said. "This house holds light well." We closed in less than a week. I used part of the restitution funds to furnish the place with familiar comforts. An armchair, nearly identical to Grandpa's old one, a bookshelf for his poetry, and soft rugs for the hallways. A ramp was installed at the front door. The bathroom was refitted. Everything was made with him in mind. When I wheeled him into the living room on move-in day, he didn't speak for a long time. He just looked around slowly, his eyes tracing the way the sunlight touched the wooden floors, the way the curtains breathed in the ocean breeze. Then he nodded once. "This'll do," he whispered. That first night, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. I brewed him peppermint tea, the way he used to make for me when I came home from school with scraped knees or broken pride. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Peace had a sound of its own. The days settled into a rhythm. Every morning I brewed tea and sat with him by the window. Sometimes he dozed, sometimes he read, slowly still rebuilding his strength. We went for walks, short ones at first, him in a chair, me pushing, both of us soaking in air that wasn't sterilized or recycled. He started physical therapy again. Progress came in small victories, a steady hand, a full sentence, a smile that reached his eyes. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was earned. At night, I'd read from his poetry collection. He'd nod along, sometimes correcting my cadence. We laughed more. He teased me about my cooking. I taught him how to use Netflix. He pretended to hate it, but I caught him binge-watching wildlife documentaries twice. I was still getting used to the absence of noise from Mom and Sophie. No calls, no texts, just silence. At first it stung, then dulled, like a cut healing under a scar. Some absences grow lighter over time, not heavier. I didn't miss the drama. I missed the idea of what they should have been. But that grief had already passed. Now I had something real. I had Grandpa, and he had me. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the knock came. I was in the kitchen steeping peppermint tea. Grandpa was seated by the window, crossword in his lap, his pen tapping thoughtfully against his knee. The breeze carried the scent of salt and the soft clink of the wind chimes out front. Peaceful, predictable. The knock felt like a ripple in still water. I opened the door to find Mum and Sophie standing on the porch, both holding a box wrapped in gold ribbon. Store-bought cookies from a place downtown I used to love as a child. They looked uncertain, out of place. "Hi," Mum said, her voice tight. "We thought we'd stop by." Behind her, Sophie gave a small wave. Neither of them looked at me fully. I hesitated, unsure what to say. Then I stepped aside. They walked in slowly, glancing around at the house like it belonged to someone they once knew. Their eyes landed on Grandpa, who had turned in his chair. He didn't look surprised. "Hi, Dad," Mum said softly. "You're looking stronger." Grandpa didn't smile. He gestured to the couch. "Sit." They did. There was an awkward silence as the box was placed on the coffee table. Sophie shifted uncomfortably. Mum cleared her throat. "We heard about the ruling. We didn't mean for things to go the way they did." Grandpa's face was calm. "But they did." She nodded. "Leon, he acted without thinking. We just thought it was all temporary, that it'd get sorted once you were better." His voice was steady, clear. "He sold my house. I know. He used me." She looked down. Sophie spoke up next. "We didn't know he'd do all of that. We just went along with it." There was a pause. Then Grandpa said, with a firmness I hadn't heard in months, "I'm not angry." Their heads lifted in surprise. "But I'm awake now," he continued, "and that's worse for some people than me being silent." Silence fell. It wasn't cold, just honest. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. But in that moment, every word cut cleaner than any scream could have. Mum blinked fast. Sophie looked at the cookies, as if they might excuse what had been done. They didn't stay long. They stood, offered weak hugs that Grandpa didn't return, and left the box behind. When the door closed, Grandpa exhaled slowly. "Well, that's done." I sat beside him. "Are you okay?" He looked out the window where the chimes swayed in the wind. "I am, because I'm not waiting anymore." I didn't say anything. Neither did he. Outside, the wind picked up. The chimes rang brighter, clearer, like bells in a forgotten church, like memory shaking off dust. That evening we sat on the porch again. I sipped tea while Grandpa read quietly. The air was warm, peaceful. I closed my eyes and listened to the chimes. They didn't sound like loss anymore. They sounded like something reclaimed. A home, a bond, a quiet kind of victory. And I realized something, sitting there in the fading light. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is whoever stays, whoever chooses you when everyone else walks away.